While 2030 seems like a distant date, it will be here soon enough, and with it comes the biggest ever change to the British automotive market. But what does the combustion car ban actually involve? What happens when? And why should you start to consider your options sooner rather than later? Before we look forward, a few words on where we've come from. We are entering the post-combustion era as we wean ourselves off fossil fuels. But we have been here before. The first electrochemical battery was built by Alessandro Volta in 1800. The first fuel cells were invented in 1838. The first commercial solar panel was created in 1881. And the first electric generating wind turbine in 1887. And in the late 1800s and early 1900s, electric cars were the preferred method for automobile propulsion. In the same era, Carl Benz and Rudolf Diesel were working on gasoline engines. But it was the introduction of Henry Ford's Model T in 1908, and very specifically the invention of the electric starter motor, that tipped the balance away from electric cars. It was almost a century later that General Motors launched the ill-fated EV1. It wasn't that it wasn't successful. In fact, it was arguably too popular with those that got their hands on one. And the program was unceremoniously and controversially scrapped in 2002. But all was not lost. The early pioneers behind Tesla were inspired by the EV1 and started their own story with the Roadster, Model S and Model X, enabling them to get some grip with the concept of electric cars. Meanwhile, as traditional manufacturers tried to keep pace with the increasing environmental standards, the Dieselgate scandal broke in 2015, and the subject of clean air catapulted them into the mainstream. In 2016, Tesla announced its first affordable electric car, the Model 3, to widespread acclaim. And not only has its popularity translated into more than 1 million being made since 2018, but it also inspired other leading manufacturers to embrace the electric vehicle revolution. To the extent that there are around 70 or so electric car makes and models on sale in Europe now. And it's expected that there will be at least 500 by 2025. As such, it's now widely accepted that the next decade will belong to battery electric vehicles. And in 2020, the UK brought forward its own ban on new combustion engine vehicles to 2030, with the ban on hybrids being brought forward to 2035. And this is all part of a green industrial revolution in which wind, solar and batteries will play a significant part. So what does this mean for you, and what does the next 10 to 20 years hold? Well, we're talking to LeasePlan's Matt Walters to find out more. So Matt, what is driving this change?
I think everything, in a word. The government are gearing up to a massive change and a massive shift towards, zero tailpipe emissions and the ban of petrol and diesel cars by 2030, and certainly wanting to be more ambitious than the European aims of the 2050 net zero goals. So obviously the biggest thing that we all see, and you can't fail to see it every day, is the climate change. We're seeing wildfires, out of control burning in Greece. We've seen it in America. We're seeing, global flooding effects, and certainly the most recent ones in Belgium and Germany. But the debate is coming much closer to home. And actually the debate and the challenge that needs to be addressed now is more around air quality. And it's really highlighted the danger of the particulates that are in the air, the nitrogen oxides that are generated, particularly by older diesels and heavy goods vehicles. But certainly all internal combustion engines have some element of harmful emissions, CO2 and nitrogen oxides, which is clearly harmful to people's health. And that's probably the most fundamental reason that the agenda around clean air zones is moving forward at such a pace.
So Matt, how big a switch then is this for both car makers and consumers alike?
I think it's really hard to overstate it, Robert, in truth. If you think about where we've been probably for the past 100 years, with our internal combustion engines and our desire to be driving our petrol and diesel motor cars. Particularly in the UK, we are very wedded to our cars. We are a nation of drivers. And we now have an infrastructure in place. Petrol stations proliferated around the UK. It's something that we've got very, very used to. And for car manufacturers, for consumers, for the retail market, for the second-hand market, for leasing companies like ourselves, it's a massive switch to move away from a complete technology. If you think now that manufacturers are actually having to come out with public statements about R&D, so if you think that Fiat and VW, particularly of note in the last 6 months, have come out and said there will be no R&D spend on internal combustion engine cars from 2025 onwards. They're completely shifting away. Plug-ins, for example, now make up 1 in 7 of the registrations that were made last year. So there's this massive shift away. And certainly for people that take out leases, fleet companies out there, you'd say 2030, you go, well, it's 9 years away, that's quite a way. We've got loads of time to think about this. You haven't. That's 2, maybe 3 renewal cycles on a standard fleet term. So the need to act now and act quickly and deal with quite a seismic change in technology and where we're going as a nation of drivers is fundamental.
So Matt, can we walk through what we can expect in the next few years?
So I guess it's important to note we've just seen a whole bunch of changes, right? So if we go back a bit and start there. So April 2020, changed taxation of electric cars in the UK with a 0% rate. 15th of March 2021, this year, Bath launches the first clean air zone citywide outside of London. At the same time, plug-in car grant was modified in April this year, as well as the extension of 100% first-year allowances, making those cars cheaper to buy. And April 2021 in the budget also saw the home charge grant changed and modified. Birmingham launched its clean air zone in June this year, really important step. Big one is that in 25th of October, so just coming, the expansion of London's ultra-low emission zone, so the geographical area moves and becomes greater. And also this year we've seen multiple car makers confirm they'll be going all electric. It's a good thing. And then obviously we're expecting further announcements on clean air zones as we go through the year, Bristol, Bradford, Leicester, Newcastle.
So it's amazing the amount of change that's going on, but can you kind of go through in some detail what is specifically happening then?
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at clean air zones specifically, the big change around clean air zones for London is this geographical area, and it's sort of difficult to get your head around. So at the moment, the clean air zone in London really is the same as the congestion charge zone. They're both pretty much uniform in geographical area. Actually in October, it goes out to the North Circular and the South Circular. So If you imagine the Circular Ring Road, much bigger area. Key to this is that they were looking and considering some exemptions in terms of residential areas, etc. No one's exempt. If you have a car that falls foul of the legislation, you'll pay the fee. So it's a big change. Bath, again, 1st of March came in. Bath's an interesting one because not only have they introduced it, but they're also going to be monitoring its effect. So as well as kind of saying this is what we want to do, this is what we want to control, they're actually going to look at behavioural change and see what clean air zones do, and they're very open to modifying what they're doing. Birmingham was a bit of a false start, but they did the right thing actually. They were very bold, they kind of pulled it, made some modifications, and they relaunched, and more cities will follow. The one I want to touch on is Bristol. So clean air zones is an interesting one. So the recommendations and the legislation are pretty clear from the government that they fall into category A, B, C and D in terms of how clean air zones are set. But there's no more formal guidance then as to how cities adopt those and how they introduce it. So it's not uniform, which is a challenge. And if I kind of pick on Bristol, which is my hometown, actually what Bristol have done is they've introduced it, or they will be in October, introducing a clean air zone. But then there's another layer on top that says outside the hours of 9 in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you're not allowed to drive diesels at all in this particular geographical area. So you've got an overall clean air zone, and then you've got a smaller clean air zone with very clearly defined parameters between certain time zones.
And that includes presumably delivery vehicles then?
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely, everything.
Wow.
So passenger taxis, everything is included in that band between those areas. If you're in a diesel, we don't want you before school hours, because there's lots of schools in that particular area, and in office hours, and in school pickup time past 2 o'clock. That's their absolute focus.
Wow, that is a challenge to a lot of people.
It is a huge challenge. If we think about legislation, we touched on it. April 2021, new company car tax. So new company car tax announcements, we should probably say. The template has been in for a while. So this is where we've got one band for electric vehicles, or zero rated electric vehicles, zero emissions, and then you've got 5 bands for varying different range hybrids that do electric range. But it's 1% now. We talked about 0% before for company car tax, and that was in 2020, 2021 tax year. It's now only 1%. So, we've talked about it in previous discussions. If you think about my £50,000 Polestar with a 1% rating, that's a £500 taxable value. I'll pay about £18 a month, something like that, in company car tax net. If I had a £25,000 Golf, that would be about £7,500 taxable value. I'd be paying about £250 a month net. So that brings into stark contrast what those changes mean in terms of those vehicles. And again, we saw changes to the plug-in car grant this year as well. So that dropped for £2,500 for vehicles £35,000 and above. And OZEV have been very, very clear that grant will reduce again next year as manufacturer list prices come in line, and it will be abolished in 2023. We're hoping it's replaced with something to continue that impetus. But to be honest with you, I can tell you now, we will lease any EV that we can get our hands on. At the moment, they are in such high demand. The reduction in the grant hasn't done anything to that.
And also, I think the price of the vehicles is going to reduce. I mean, that's they're not going to get more expensive.
Yeah, it already is. If you look at the price of the MG electric, that's a very, very low cost electric vehicle. We've talked before about the importance when you're looking at electric and making comparisons against your internal combustion engine counterparts. You've got to look at a similar vehicle.
So let's talk about the choice of electric cars now. I mean, that is expanding, isn't it?
I think it's fantastic. If you think about where we were a few years ago, when what did we have? Kind of Tesla S, Renault Zoe, nothing wrong with those cars at all, but very, very limited choice. We've seen this mass proliferation from lots of different manufacturers. We've mentioned Polestar. You can't help but mention Polestar. I mean, it's a fantastic product. Collaboration between Volvo and Geely that's come to our shores. We've got Chinese entrants coming, which are really fascinating. You've got product from Hyundai and Kia. I mean, the new Kia product is absolutely stunning. ID4, what a stunning car that is, and ID3 as well. So 30 new models alone this year. And when we look we look down our charts as to what's coming in 2022 and beyond, it's huge. And I would also add into that this massive choice of electric vans that's coming as well, in slightly more behind, but the car choice is fantastic. If you want an urban runaround, if you want luxury, if you want super luxury, something like an e-tron or I-Pace, or even off-road, and let's keep our eyes on Rivian. Big, possible big news with a factory possibly coming to Bridgewater.
Yes,
would be absolutely fantastic. But that is probably the space that's still missing, is that 4x4 pickup space that your L200s and your Navaros really pick up at the moment. So it's absolutely massive, really, really exciting.
And of course, battery technology has opened up a whole new world of possibilities with electric cars.
Yeah, massively so. So they've become lighter but more powerful at the same time. You don't need a 94 kilowatt battery to do 300 miles anymore. If you look at Hyundai Kona, it's got a much, much smaller battery, fantastic car, great range, good price point. The positioning in the car, the aerodynamics have improved in more shapes, more sizes, and of course they can go further on a single charge, and they can charge more rapid. That's the other thing. So the fact that you've got a nest of batteries that can go 300 miles, the time it takes to get those batteries charged is also really important. 150 to 200 miles and beyond is now really common. We recently published the top 20 range vehicles, the top 20 ranges, and I was fascinated because Polestar didn't make the list. 260 mile range on paper, not on the top
Wow.
on the top list.
So I guess the next question is, if there are enough really compelling electric cars on sale, more and more people want to buy them, the number of electric cars increases enormously. Then the stumbling point surely is the charging infrastructure. Is that going to develop alongside it?
There is a massive amount that is being done. There's a £3 billion infrastructure fund now from the government. What's interesting about that is they are diversifying that to local council level. So local councils are now expected to have charging czars. Conservative Party love their czars. And those guys are going to be responsible to reach out to local communities, business leaders, and understand in a really targeted way where those charge points are needed before the money can be spent. But charging points are up 270% in the last 5 years in terms of their installation. There's over 24,000 charge points now with 42,000-ish connectors, something like that. Huge commitment from the government into research. And the new face of charge points is also set to be revealed at COP26. We're assured it won't be Charging McPoint face that actually wins it, but it'll be interesting to see that. But yeah, it's really, really key. If nothing changes on the infrastructure, are we going to make Ambition 2030 that net zero shift? Frankly, no, we're not. As the vehicles proliferate, the infrastructure that's needed, the technology improvements that are needed, the price point on the vehicles, all of those things need to come together to drive it. But while range anxiety is still in people's mind in terms of charging, as we've said in a previous question, we're a nation of drivers. We like to drive. The infrastructure has to be there to support it.
And then the question a lot more people are starting to ask now is, can the national grid and our generating capacity cope with this extra demand?
That's a big question. I think the short answer is, as the proliferation happens, if you talk to National Grid and you listen to the people that are responsible for this and the DNOs, the answer is right here, right now. If we suddenly ensured 500,000 charge points, the answer is probably not. But as they proliferate and we build more power, the offshore wind farm that's being put in by 2028, the grid upgrades that are already happening, the infrastructure upgrades. Actually, the infrastructure is probably being upgraded faster than the charge points are rolling out. So the short answer is yes, it will be ready when we need it.
So at what point then will EVs dominate the market, do you think? Do you think it will even take as long as to 2030?
So I hope it doesn't. I hope we get there sooner for the environment and for the climate, apart from anything else. And we are seeing this race towards EVs. Let's not forget that actually 2030 is a ban on new sales of petrol and diesel vehicles. They will still be with us for some time, right? There's a second-hand market that needs to be dealt with, whether that's done through scrappage schemes or whether there are other incentives to get people out of internal combustion engines. So that they're still going to be with us. But if we look at the stats, 2018, 2.5% of regs, something like that, were EV. 2019, it was about 3%. 2020 last year was 10%, and we're currently at 15%. So the interest, the dominance, as we've talked about, pricing coming down, technology changes, range changes, new entrants from overseas coming into this market space, manufacturers committing more and more of their R&D budgets, which are huge amounts of money, by the way, to this product. Is it possible that we could all be ordering EVs before 2030? Yeah, quite frankly, I think it probably is.
Let's go through some of the more notable milestones between now and 2030.
So starting with something a bit close to home, 2023, grants end for electric cars in the UK. 2025, gas boiler installations banned in all new build homes, switching to more hydrogen and ground source. 2028, £40 billion more of investment in Britain's energy networks. 2030, ban on sale of new combustion engine cars and vans, which is what we're really talking about today. And then 2035, ban on the sale of all new hybrid combustion engine cars and vans.
So Matt, can you talk us through these bans and how companies and individuals can adapt to accommodate them?
So looking at the 2030 ban first, we are already seeing companies and individuals move towards EVs en masse. It is the technology of choice for battery electric vehicles, and certainly for vans below 7.5 tonne, I'd kind of say. And then above 7.5 tonne, there's kind of going to be a mix of hydrogen fuel cell and battery electric. as we look at things like onboard power and some of the other challenges. But the 2030 ban is absolutely set in stone now. It's in law. There will be no passenger cars sold in the UK on new registrations that are petrol and diesel only, and only the most efficient hybrids will escape the ban until 2035. Now, smarter minds than me have kind of looked at that, looked at the pace of change towards EVs, looked at what most efficient hybrids might mean, and actually what we'll probably see is all hybrids be banned as well by 2030 in truth. But that will be a natural kind of evolution of the ban. Worthwhile remembering though, it's only on the sale of new. So this is new registrations made in the UK. You know, we still have a second-hand market that tails to something like, 7 to 9 years in terms of people replacing their vehicle. Although, do remember that over the course of the next, 7, 8, 9 years, as we lead into 2030, the proliferation of vehicles into our industry, which is the fleet industry, is going to make a much more healthy second-hand market for EVs as we go into second renewal cycle, third renewal cycle. Hybrids we've mentioned, they have their place right now. Some of the schemes that we are putting in with our customers at the moment, we still have drivers where hybrid really is the answer. There are some very specific pockets, but again, most important is to look at journey patterns, not just annual mileage. When we've moved away from that now in a big way. So get in the queue, don't wait. Talk to whoever you need to talk to and get on the journey. And
if not beforehand, then really by 2040, there's going to be a massive change with not only the home heating, but the whole transport network. I mean, what are the big benefits we're going to see from that?
Lower emissions, lower greenhouse gases, lower levels of nasty air pollutants, but it's also cheaper to do. So why wouldn't you take advantage of the various incentives that there are for, we mentioned it, air source, ground source, different technologies, getting your home, fitter and generating power in a different way, looking at vehicle to grid technologies, the clean air zones that are coming in, taking advantage of the technology that's available to you to make sure that you can still drive where you want to drive. And one of the big ones, I guess, is innovation. This is driving this sea change, the money that's available to industry to invest in battery technology and kind of move the needle really from an innovative point of view. It's really, really exciting.
So we know the transition to EVs is inevitable, but what's it really like to make the switch? We spoke to someone who has their own electric car to understand their real-world experience.
So the biggest challenge here of the ICE ban, no matter what anyone says, is people's attitude towards electric cars. And it's all the misinformation we get, and it's all the naysayers and doom and gloom. That's the biggest problem we have. If you actually talk to people who are driving EVs and who are doing this thing every day, we can make this work. The infrastructure is getting so much better, and it is better over 5 years that I've been driving an EV. It's massively better, and it will improve massively in the next 9 years as we go towards 2030. So our first EV we bought in 2015, so it's coming on 6 years now, and we went to having both our cars being EVs in 2019. They're brilliant. Electric cars are fantastic. It's a revelation to be away from the smelly diesel fumes, and yeah, they're just lovely cars. They're modern, they're smooth, they're quiet, all the things you look for in a lovely car. The thing I like most about my electric car is never having to go to a petrol station. Just plugging it at home overnight, wake up in the morning, car's charged, away you go. Or better for us, we have solar panels. So on a day where the sun is shining, we get free power. The car is charged from the sun. So there's no anything to do, just plug it in and forget. Typically for us with charging, we charge when we need to. We have a charger at home, and if the car is a bit low, we'll charge it, but we don't have that anxiety because we have 2 electric cars. Most of our journeys are quite short. So on the odd occasion, like today when I had to come further, I plugged it in overnight and made sure I was charged to 90%, and then I set off on my journey. But generally, with the smaller car, we charge that in the summer, maybe once every week, every 2 weeks maybe, because it's only a small battery. And with the bigger one, maybe once a month, depending on if we're doing long journeys. But with lockdown, there's nowhere to go. So yeah, it's been relatively easy. We have solar panels and we have a cheap off-peak rate. So running an electric car is incredibly cheap. When we had our first electric car, I used to do all the calculations, I had all the spreadsheets, but I kind of gave up when we got to 13,000 miles and I hadn't broken £500. So yeah, it's just pennies on the mile. It's so cheap to run. There's not a consideration for us even. Pros and cons. So pros, if you can run one, if you can have one, they are just better than internal combustion cars in multitudes of ways. Forgetting the pollution, just they're nice to drive, they're easy to maintain, they don't require anything real thought once you plug them in. For those people who can't do that, then the considerations are how will you charge, the infrastructure is getting better every day. It's just a transition phase we're in. The infrastructure will be there and it is coming on. So that's the real con. I think everyone has charger anxiety. It's not the range that's the problem, it's getting to a charger and not knowing whether it's going to work, and that's the anxiety. And then it's also people's attitudes towards electric cars, the naysayers, the doom and gloom is all in the papers. And if you talk to people who live and do this and have electric cars, they'll tell you, yes, there are problems, but 99% of the time, it's a pleasure, it's easy, it's simple. Do some real research. Don't just read the papers or listen to what your friend in the pub says. Talk to EV owners and drivers. Obviously things like fully charged are amazing, but there's something to be said about talking to someone face to face who's not a car salesman, who will tell you about it. So look out for your local EV communities, the EV clubs around the country. Talk to them. They will have people there who will tell you what it's like to actually live with these things. And you won't be the first person in your situation. There will be someone else who lives in a flat on the 12th floor and has 4 kids and needs to do these things, and there will be answers for you. So in my opinion, 2030, you should be thinking about it right now. If you are looking at a new car or looking at changing your car, you need to be thinking about electric right now. If you can make it work, do it. There's very little downside to making that jump now if you can. And if you can't, then I guess the thing to be looking at is, if this car isn't going to be electric, will the next car be electric? And if so, what do I need to do to make sure that I can facilitate that car being electric?
So as you can see, while the big ban is over 8 years away, perhaps it's time to start investigating your electric options. So thank you very much, Matt, for joining us today. Really interesting stuff. Thank you. And as always, if you have been, thank you for watching.